Right, 17th of May, and it was actually a beautiful spring day. It was really lovely. It was just about 3 weeks before I was to get married, and everything seemed lovely. We didn't know, obviously, what the day would bring.
So I went up the pit, went into the office, signed my books and so on, the legal requirements, and I was crossing the bridge now, where I had met him a couple of hours earlier, and I was in working clothes, and he was in working clothes. I could see him coming from his baths. And he said, Bill, he said, I've got to go down to P26. We've got electrical problems there. We haven't called all shift. And obviously we were very concerned because this was a Monday and it was halfway through the shift and not an ounce of coal had been produced, and they needed 5 full days of production every week for the colliery to have a chance of surviving. So I said, okay. And he said, but don't go home until I see you. He said, I want to see how I got work for you that I want you to do for me. Well, that was about 10 to 11. And 2.25 hours later, he and another 30 were dead. Gone. After I left the manager at 10 to 11, I went to Bath and I got into the offices, and at about 1 o'clock, the manager's clerk came into the pay room and said, hey, he said, there's an explosion in number 1. And people said, oh, don't talk bloody rubbish and all this and that, And I had a gut feeling.
I can remember hearing a boom, not loud, and it was lunchtime. So we were coming home and I was walking up Marion Street. My father was rushing down. He'd been to fetch the keys to the assembly hall to go and open it up for them to bring the bodies there. So he said, now none of you go down. So we didn't. I can remember Ron Flowers, a few doors down, he hadn't come home. And my Auntie Nan was going back and forth there asking Ellen, are you all right? Have you heard anything? And about 6:45, she said, I better take his dinner off now. He's not coming home.
And I was the only person in that room with mining knowledge. And the first thing I did was, I thought, well, I've got to get somebody of a superior rank to me. The under manager of number 4 pit lived across the road. He was off sick. So first thing I did was I shot out of the pay room, crossed the road, ran up the steps of Cwm Clydach house where he lived and banged on the door. His wife answered the door and I said, Mr. Harris, I said, I need to speak to Mervyn. And I said, there's an explosion number 1. He came on the landing in his pyjamas and I was shouting up to him from the bottom. And I said, Mervyn, explosion number 1, He said, I'll be there now, quick as I can, Bill.
No, at about just before 1 o'clock, in the grammar school where I was teaching, the geography teacher, whose room was outside the main school, which is now the car park, where there's a sort of landscaped area now. There was a geography room, and so she could see out onto the main road and up towards Clydach. Now, there wasn't a phone connection, but she sent a message up to the head to say that she was aware of a dull thud. And then about 10 minutes later, looking out to the window, she could see a row, one after the other, of mines rescue vehicles wending their way through Tonopandi and turning towards the Clydach area.
So I ran back now. I was panting, you know, running up the vertical steps. And I ran back to the pay room where I'd been sitting, grabbed a book and a pen, ran across the bridge, and as I was running across the bridge, there were men leaving the pit, men from number 1 pit, where the explosion had occurred. And I was running, and they were trying to, I was going hell for leather, and they were trying to stop me, jumping in front of me, and I was saying, get out the bloody way, you know. They didn't know what I knew. Got to the end of the bridge, and as I came to the lamp room, I could see men in the lamp room putting their lamps on the shelf. So I went in, I told the head lamper, I said, lock the doors, get everybody's name here, now I said, and address.
Everyone was so distraught, and people were going up to the colliery because they didn't know who had been killed or who hadn't, and they were all waiting at the surface of the colliery, and there was such a feeling of despair right through Clydach Vale, Tonopandi, Trealo. It was so widespread because there were men working there that was from all of those places.
Well, I was afternoons, and I worked in number 4 pit, but number 1 pit, the explosion. Well, when I was walking up to the colliery in the afternoon, all the people of the colliery, and I wondered what had happened, like, till I went in the pit at bars, and they told me then that the explosion. So I went over the colliery, I went to the lamp room, I had my lamp, and they told me I had to go down number 1 pit to fetch him out. 4 of us.
There were 2 stretchers in it, and there were 4 men sitting on their haunches, holding the stretcher off the bottom of the cage. And the men went forward, the men that were working around there went forward to open the gate and to take the stretchers from the men inside. And, you know, I looked at these men, I could have been one of them. 2 took the leading edge, and another 2 was waiting on the other side to take the other 2 handles, you know. And it was so gentle the way it was done. They knew we were looking after our own, you know. We were tending them, you know. That will remain with me forever.
And it took a while for the headmaster to find out what was happening, piece together the details, and even then they were sort of fragmentary. So during the afternoon, he took the decision that he would keep the children in school, and then half an hour before school finished, he called the whole school into the hall, and he asked those who had any relatives in the Cambrian pit to stand aside, told them they were to go home, not delay, to go straight home. And what he did, he got the 6th form prefects to escort them.
You know, I can remember John Flowers running up and down the street. Have anyone heard about my father yet? Is my father there? Has he come up? And he was only a boy, about 10 or 11. But of course, no one had heard anything, and he was one of the casualties of the disaster.
At the moment. Well, it is about, it must be about 6 o'clock, I think, something like that they began bringing the first bodies up. And I'll always remember, you know, you see these men that are on the top of number 1 pit, everything was static. There was no movement there. Men were walking about, shuffling their feet, looking down at their feet, you know, rubbing their hands to keep, you know, keep warm and all this and that, and looking at each other. Anything to sort of avoid seeing what was about to happen, you know. I was there for the next 12 hours, and I saw all those 31 boys being brought out. And, yeah, and we waited for a long time. And Digger Davis was open number 4 pit, and when I got on with Digger, and Mervyn Harris and the manager number 4, and Digger come on to me and he whispered to me, he said, Bill, he said, there's a lot going, he said. And the manager, and in the end the manager's gone as well.
And when you look at the roll call of those, the oldest, as you know, was 56, the youngest was 24, a lifetime in front of him. The oldest had 9 children. And or whatever compensation wouldn't have been enough.
I left the colliery, and as I walked along Howard Street there, you know, there were people still out at that time, but just short of 12:30. I was living on 100 Warren Street at the time, opposite Carlap's shop, just slightly above the school. And as I was walking along Howard Street, the people had gathered at the door, 5 or 6 of them, and a lot of them knew me, you know. And I was walking past them, oh, Bill, and they wanted me to say something, and I couldn't, you know. I wanted to know if I had anything I could add to them, tell the news, and I couldn't. I didn't want to.
No.
And that was across Howard Street, going down Warren Street, and when I got to the bottom of Warren Street, there was a crowd at my gate. My wife had been told about the explosion. She was working in Tonopandi.
Yeah.
She'd been taken up, and when she got to the colliery, somebody said that I'd been seen, so she knew I was okay.
Yeah.
And when that happened as well to Tommy Hand's wife, she was told that he was safe, but he died. She was given wrong information.
They brought the bodies to the Assembly Hall, and the district nurses and the colliery nurse, they'd bathed them as best they could and put them on trestles so that families could come and identify the bodies.
Wall Street, and I could see a hearse outside what was the Assembly Hall. It was the miners, you know, library and so on, and the billiard table and all that there. And as an annex of that, there was what they called the slope, and it might have been a cinema of some sort at one time because the floor was sloping.
Yeah.
But I danced there, you know, when I was a boy, going to, you know, I was 18, 19, going up there and dancing, taking girls to women and all this and that. And there was the door was open leading into this annex, and there was a shaft of light coming out, shining on the back of the hearse. It was like something biblical, you know,
Yeah.
that shaft of light. And we were pulling a coffin out of the back of the hearse, and when I got there, they were just disappearing into the back to lay the coffin on the floor. And when I drew a breath there, I had to stop, and I opened it and went in, and those 31 coffins were laid on the dance floor. Terrible sight, you know, unbelievable.
But it's something that you'll never forget. I often look at the graves when I go over Triada Cemetery of the few that are buried there with stones on. And I know a lot of people were really, they just couldn't get over it. A lot of men went in to help clear up the pit when it happened, to get the bodies out, and they never got over the shock of it. You know, my brother-in-law was there. He was lucky he was in the pit, and he was with the Doughty prop engineer, and they went through a tunnel that wasn't normally used, and they missed the actual blast through going through there. And I went with my husband down, that's his brother, down to his house at 6 o'clock because we hadn't heard anything. And his wife was most annoyed because he hadn't sent down to tell them or come home. But he helped bring the bodies and make the place safe, as did quite a few men. He never talked about it much after. Never.
And they were calling for miners who worked in the seams that the explosion happened to go and help to get the bodies out. And my brother was one of them. And he was going up the colliery to work, and every day he came home, it was because that he knew a lot of the men that were there. It upset him so much that he would cry for hours when he came home. And that happened for weeks after. He couldn't get over what he had to face.
You know, the following day I saw the one chap named Bob Tail. He lived on Warren Street, big, strong man. He was like Bluto in the Popeye cartoons, you know, that I always called him that way, the opposite of that for them. Big, strong man, and their hands like bananas, and, you know, blue scarred, nicotine stained. And I was standing next to him on the colliery yard one day when a group of us were talking there, and he put his hand to puff on a player's capstan full strength, which he always smoked. And as he was breathing the smoke out, I looked at his face, and the tears were running out his face, you know. So it affected everybody. Some didn't show it, but you take it from me, it did affect everybody.
On the following morning, it was absolutely awful. The children filed into assembly, and as you know, like any other kids, they usually made a fuss and giggled and laughed. That morning, they just came in and there was silence. And it turned out that in the small school, there were only about 500 pupils there. There wasn't a single class that wasn't affected in some way or another. And the headmaster just looked at them and he had no words. He took a deep breath and all he could say is, "We are here for you." Children filed out, obviously the children of the victims weren't in school, but their friends, their next door neighbours, their cousins, their uncles, you know what it's like in an extended community.
But it was the despair amongst the people and the community that was the worst. It sort of put a black cloud over everyone for quite a long time.
But it affected everybody, because in a close-knit mining community, or any other community, doesn't even happen to be a miners, the Rhondda is a particularly close-knit area. We all know people, we have a sense of identity, and what hurts our friends hurts us. What hurts our neighbours hurts us. And this has been a long, long scar in the memory of the Clydach Vale. There have been other disasters, and of course the following year all disasters were eclipsed by the Aberfan. But this shows the price that the miners paid for coal.
And then the funeral started then, you know, a week or so later. And I walked from Cambrian, from the colliery, walked over to Triala on a couple of occasions, to the cemetery there.
And a week later they had the funeral, and I think every man in Clydach walked in front of the hearses all the way to Triala Cemetery for the ones that were being buried, and they met up on the way with other hearses with men from different parts of the Rhondda. I think they were from Triala and that, and they met up to go to Triala Cemetery. It was, how can you say, a sight that you'd never see again, all them men walking in silence. And every shop closed in Pandy, and every person working in a shop office stood on the pavement and watched the procession going through.
We walked from Clydach Vale to Triala Cemetery. We walked all the way over, but they put the coffins in the assembly hall.
The other thing I remember was the funeral and the procession that walked all the way from the colliery right down to the cemetery. It was massive, and everybody was lining the streets, and it was so traumatic that even if you knew no one in there, you were crying.
So the cemetery there. And then we come down to, on the way there'd be people standing at the curbside, middle-aged ladies and old ladies with pennies on, you know, with you know, dressed, that's because that's how they dressed, you know, back in 60 years ago. And perhaps there was a little boy standing by the side of him, and you could see, as we were walking, you could see the old lady putting her arm around the grandson, probably pulling him tight. As good as saying, yeah, you are not going there, my boy. Yeah.
In thought. And you know what, the last thing I'll tell you, the day of one of the mass funerals, as the day of May the 17th had been a glorious spring day, this was a horrible day, as if the whole valley was in tears. It was one of those horrible, misty, damp days, and all you could hear is the tramp of the miners as they followed their comrades to their last resting place.